We are in the second webinar in the Climate Talk series today, and we are very, very elated, I would say, to have Vandana Ji with us in this webinar, in this series of Climate Talks. So this is a webinar series that we have started to introduce ourselves, to understand climate change from different perspectives. And today, we have with us Kalyan, and I would be hosting this webinar. And we also have with us Supriya Chawla, who is the head of Chevening India, with us to talk about chevening briefly. So before we move on, I would request Kalyan to talk about ST4CA, Systems Thinking for Climate Action, and then would request Supriya Chawla to introduce chevening and its activities to us before we move on to the webinar. Kalyan, would you walk us through what is ST4CA?
Sure. Thank you so much, Pradnya. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Vandana ji, namaste, and very warm good evening to everyone. ST4CA stands for Systems Thinking for Climate Action. As we know, climate action is one of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, that is Goal 13. We are trying to bring in systems perspective, systems thinking among the practitioners, scholars who are concerned about climate change and who are working towards it. Last year, both Pradnya and we studied in the UK at Institute of Development Studies, University of Sussex, and we both were supported by British government through its Chevening Scholarship Program. So we are part of the alumni network. And as one of the alumni initiatives, last year we started with this campaign. And last year we produced 5 working papers on different aspects of how climate action ecosystem is evolving in India. We also designed systems thinking for climate action workshops, and those workshops were offered in some of the universities in Mumbai to start with. We also conducted a few online workshops last year, and we hope to continue with these workshops over the next 1 year. One of the activities that we started with last month is the Climate Talk series. And the idea is basically to have an illuminated person guide with us to talk about different aspects of climate action and let these discussions be recorded and made available on YouTube and other social media so that people can later on refer to them. And maybe towards the end of the year, we can document these interactions in one or the other form. They will also be uploaded on our website. Basically, we are trying to bring in different expertise on climate action and get people together to listen to them, read those, so that we can increase the awareness. Idea is to create a network of young professionals who are getting into climate action space in India. That's the ambition. We are working towards it. So this year, we have also planned to do some 25 interviews with climate action experts across India. And we will be hosting some networking events and workshops in 5 different cities of India. So that's about the ST4CA. And I'm glad to share that this initiative was generously supported by Chevening Award, Chevening alumni in India. Would like to have Supriya. Supriya is with us. Supriya heads Chevening alumni in India. Chevening in India, Chevening Scholarship Program in India. Would like to invite Supriya to talk more about Chevening and how Chevening supports different alumni initiatives like ST4CA. Supriya, over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks, Kalyan, for the introduction. And so thanks, everyone, also for joining in today. I'm really pleased to be part of this webinar. So facilitating systematic understanding amongst Chevening alumni for synergies in climate action may have started out as a small project last year, which was funded, of course, by the Chevening Alumni Program Fund. But I think what is heartening is to see that our 2 Chevening alumni, Pradnya and Kalyan, carry on this mission to educate, create awareness, and help build capacity. The threat is obviously real, the effects are visible, and I think we all now have a role to play, and very quickly, to combat climate change. So thank you, Pradnya and Kalyan, for your continued efforts. So I have been asked to speak about Chevening scholarships, not surprising since I was invited by two Chevening alumni themselves, but I will do so briefly with the hope that there might be some bright and passionate people in the audience who may be inspired to apply. So the objective of this UK government flagship program is to change lives and create global leaders. It is for those who wish to create a lasting positive impact when they come back to their home countries. It is mandatory for everyone to return if they are a part of the scholarship. For those who want to work towards transforming lives, communities, basically helping create an equal, inclusive, and a better future for all. So Chevening is fully funded 1 year for a 1-year master's program in the UK, and the scholars get to choose what and where they'd like to study. So just a brief, a few sentences on how large this program is. It's offered in about 160 countries, and the India program is the largest. We offer over 100 awards every year. In the last few years, we've been trying to expand the socioeconomic and the geographical outreach to include those from underprivileged communities, marginalized communities, first-generation learners, and also include many who are a part of smaller cities and tier 2, tier 3 towns. And I think we've really found outstanding talent. So our outreach will continue, and those of you who are alumni in the audience, please help us in this endeavor to bring into Chevening the finest from across the country. So also to kind of help increase the number of lives Chevening can change, this year we've had new industry partners. So HSBC, Pearson, Hindustan Unilever Limited, Tata Sons, and the Adani Group have also joined hands with us in India. And together they will sponsor approximately about 20 scholars or so. Very quickly, also for those who are probably senior or mid-career professionals, we also have these 2 or 3 month-long Chevening fellowships in themes like cybersecurity, journalism, science and innovation, and leadership and excellence. So applications for all of our programs will open in the month of August. So do look up our website, and if this has inspired you enough, if selected, you will be part of a very distinguished group of people. We've got 18 heads of states, heads of industry. There is media leaders in the government, influential leaders from almost every sector. So this is a network of about 50,000 people around the globe and about 3,500 in India. So I hope I whet your appetite enough to send you to our website, chevening.org. And I think I'll stop now. Because what is lined up ahead is exciting, including a very fascinating guest speaker. And it's lovely to see you, Dr. Vandana Shiva. I'm very excited to also hear you speak later today. So thank you, everyone, and all the very best.
Thank you so much, Supriya. That was a really marathon overview of what Chevening is doing. And as she rightly mentioned, and Kalyan also mentioned, this initiative was initially supported and is done in collaboration with Chevening India. So moving on to the talk, I would initially like to introduce Dr. Vandana Shiva. I know it's a kind of a redundant activity when it comes to Dr. Vandana Shiva, because almost everyone who's here is here because they know her. But yes, I would still like to go through a brief introduction, because there are a lot of points that we would come to know just by listening to what is there here. So just bear with me for a few minutes. Dr. Vandana Shiva is trained as a physicist and did her PhD on the subject hidden variables and non-locality in quantum theory from the University of Western Ontario in Canada. She later shifted to interdisciplinary research in science, technology, and environmental policy, which she carried on at the Indian Institute of Science and the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. In 1982, she founded an independent institute, the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology in Dehradun, dedicated to high quality and independent research to address the most significant ecological and social issues of our times, in close partnership with local communities and social movements. In 1991, she founded Navdanya, a national movement to protect the diversity and integrity of living resources, especially native seed, the promotion of organic farming and fair trade. In 2004, she started Bij Vidyapit, an international college for sustainable living in Doon Valley in collaboration with Schumacher College, UK. Dr. Shiva combines the sharp intellectual inquiry with courageous activism. Time magazine identified Dr. Shiva as an environmental hero in 2003, and Asia Week has called her one of the 5 most powerful communicators of Asia. Forbes magazine in November 2010 has identified Dr. Vandana Shiva as one of the top 7 most powerful women on the globe. Dr. Shiva has received honorary doctorates from University of Paris, University of Western Ontario, University of Oslo and Connecticut College, University of Guelph. Among her many awards are the Alternative Nobel Prize Right Livelihood Award 1993, Order of the Golden Ark Global 500 Award of UN, and Earth Day International Award. Lennon Ono Grant for Peace Award by Yoko Ono in 2009, Sydney Peace Prize in 2010, Doshi Bridge Builder Award, Calgary Peace Prize, and Thomas Merton Award in the year 2011, the Fukuoka Award and the Prism of Reason Award in 2012, the Griffin D'Argentino Prize, the Midori Prize of Biodiversity 2006, Virangana Award, the Sanctuary Wildlife Award 2018, International Environment Summit and Award 2018, and Amrita Devi Award 2021. It looks like it's one award or more than one award every year, and we're still waiting for the awards in 2022 and many more to come in the years. So with this brief introduction, I would like to begin our discussion today with Dr. Vandana Shiva with a very broad question, Vandanaji. As we all know, we are all trying to understand this huge elephant that is in the room that is called climate change, and everybody is trying to grapple with different parts of the elephant and understanding it from that point of view. So we would like to understand from you today as to what are the key pointers from all these years' work and experience. What are the key pointers that you have to share with us when it comes to climate crisis? How do you look at it?
I see the climate crisis as a systems crisis, as a living systems crisis, because the Earth is a living system. The Earth managed her climate, created a climate, and in effect, it's just the last 200 years of fossil fuel use and 100 years of oil, an oil civilization really, that is the rupture of the systems through which the Earth organized her planet. I never used the word climate change because it was too linear. It made it look like, oh, temperatures will increase. And so you have the climate skeptics talking, oh, won't it be lovely for Scandinavia? We'll be swimming in the winter. We'll be growing wine, the British said. And that wasn't what I was experiencing. What I was experiencing was climate chaos, climate catastrophe, climate disasters. And we are in a very, very vulnerable part of the world. Interestingly, we're a part of the world that understood how to do the right thing for the Earth and a climate system. And we aren't responsible for most of the emissions that are leading to climate change, the pollution that's leading to climate change, but we are the most affected, as the most recent IPCC report tells us. Now, over the years, I'm basically trained in physics, but I'm learning my living systems science, both by observing living systems and understanding the processes of change, and also understanding overlapping processes in different spheres. Now, we have seen in the last few decades the total explosion of something called metabolic diseases. And these metabolic disorders, like diabetes and everything, is related to food that is not matched to the body. So they call lifestyle diseases, but we call them food style diseases. They are metabolic disorders because of the mismatch of the body's metabolism and the food you're eating. Interestingly, food very often in textbooks is called fuel, and the body is just called machine. So food reduces to bad fuel, leads to metabolic disorders. And if you expand it to the planetary scale, the Earth has amazing energy systems. The Earth had amazing carbon cycles, nitrogen cycles, hydrogen cycles. Those are the cycles, over these 50 years of my research and work in ecology. I've realized that the main thing about ecosystems and ecological stability and sustainability is maintain the cycles, don't disrupt them. And basically what you've done is just like people are living on a junk diet, we are force feeding the Earth a junk diet of fossil fuels. And that's where there is disruption and happen. I see climate chaos as a metabolic disorder of Gaia as a whole.
That's a very, very interesting insight, because calling it only climate change makes at times makes it sound very benign. And the moment you call it climate chaos, the moment you call it climate catastrophe, it kind of brings home the gravity of the situation. And of course, the whole metaphor of metabolism drives home the point. I would like to move on to the point of, the stereotypes that are developing around climate change. Is the moment you say climate change, you talk about fossil fuels, you talk about renewable energies and consuming less and things like that. But, the work that you've done around biodiversity and biodiversity conservation is also a significant part, and we would like to learn from you today. Though briefly, I know it's a huge topic, but if you could just tell us or give us those key insights at how biodiversity conservation is contributing, can contribute to climate action, and how it will help us address this issue.
When the two environmental treaties were finalized at the Earth Summit in 1992, I'm sure most of you are post-92 children, but the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Climate Treaty were really sister treaties. And I remember working with our minister so clearly about the biodiversity economy of energy in India. Now, 90% of our energy was renewable. Not renewable only in terms of industrial solar and industrial wind, but renewable in terms of animal energy. When I did my science policy work at the Institute of Science, the director, Mr. Ramaswamy, Dr. Ramaswamy, had done the most amazing work on animals in this country. And they used to jokingly call him the cart man. So there we were just 10% dependent on fossil fuels. We were 90% dependent on renewable, we call it in science, endosomatic energies of the system itself. But along the way, the directions of CBD and UNFCCC got further and further and further apart. And the disconnection became deep, both in social terms, the kind of people involved, in solution terms, what will be the solution. But for me, one is my work on biodiversity itself has been informing me a lot, and that's the reason in the lead up to climate change summit at Copenhagen in 2009, I wrote my book, Soil Not Oil. I actually wrote it first as an essay for a climate meeting in England. And then it grew into the book called Soil Not Oil. And of course, it's interesting that in these 13 years, the soil has suddenly come into discourse. It was an outcast discussion when I wrote that book. Yeah, it was heresy. How can you bring biodiversity and living soil into the picture? And I have chapters in that book on how solutions, like at that time, biofuel was big. And now all the data is coming out that actually when you add all the destruction, biofuels, ethanols are worse than coal. You know, their footprint is huge. The two areas where the biodiversity climate link is very, very deep is first and foremost how the earth evolved biodiversity to regulate climate. I wrote an essay last year before Glasgow on plants, planet, and people. And for those of you who want to understand this more deeply, please go to the website of Navdanya and read my blog. But the Earth's temperatures used to be 290 degrees. Through biodiversity and the biosphere, she brought it down to 13 degrees. Carbon dioxide used to be 4,000 parts per million. She brought it down to 270 parts per million. 98% CO2 down to 0.03%. That is a technology. And I think one of the big blind spots, and it's England's gift to us, is industrialism as the only way to see change and industrial technologies as the only technologies. But we know nature has her technologies, and photosynthesis is the most amazing technology that no carbon capture plant can even compete with. Yeah. We became a carbon-rich, oxygen-rich planet, and that's how human species could evolve. Our species could not have evolved without biodiversity. Without the rest of biodiversity, the rest of our relatives in place, the human species could not have evolved and survived on this planet. 21% oxygen is what we needed, and the earth gave it to us. And my work now, over the last so many years since I've been in, anyway, my life's been dedicated to the earth. My life's been dedicated to regenerating, conserving biodiversity, whether it's in the forest or it's the crops of seeds. My work has been on seed now since 1987. And the way in which biodiversity and climate action gets connected, where the human being now gets involved, is first and foremost, we've got to bring back green cover. We've got to bring back biodiversity. We've got to make our systems more photosynthesis intensive and more biodiversity intensive. That's the work Navdanya does. For those of you who are interested, we offer very deep courses on these practices of how you can use biodiversity as not just a climate solution, but a hunger solution, a water solution, a biodiversity loss reversion, because biodiversity is multifunctional. Unlike a carbon capture plant, which is one-dimensional and energy intensive. You know, as someone who's not just a physicist, but who's specialized in science technology assessment, I look at the system. It isn't just the earth we need to look as a system. We need to look at every technology system, every industrial system, and look at all of its footprint. Then add that up and say, this system offers this system offers this. And sadly, so many of the false solutions have a very huge footprint. I mean, things like geoengineering should not even be allowed. They actually violate the Endor Treaty, you know, the treaty to prohibit environmental modification. They are violating of the biodiversity treaty. And it's interesting, Mr. Gates bribed his way with huge payments to not have a rejection of geoengineering at one of the COPs of the CBD. So we're at a very interesting moment, because here you have very big money, unimaginable money like this world has never seen, pitted with all the wrong non-systems thinking, anti-systems thinking, anti-earth thinking, pitted against the earth and small people who are the worst victims of climate change. even though they contributed least to the climate chaos. So it'll be an interesting moment, and I hope you and your kind of young people concerned with this, the first of all, to bring systems thinking with climate change is already a revolution. So congratulations to all of you. And, you know, when I did my science technology work in IIM, we worked very closely with SCREW, the science policy unit at Sussex, from where you graduated. So a lot of work has to be done. You know, for me, every day is an awakening, because I learn every minute from biodiversity. And every minute, and I, oh my God, that's not how it works. And I read the books and I read nature. And I say, no. And I just think, not only should we have more children exposed to biodiversity, I think we should have more billionaires exposed to biodiversity. And they need to come for nature walks.
Thank you. Yes, that was a very quick walk through how Earth has evolved and how actually, you know, we can holistically look at biodiversity instead of, you know, with a myopic view of biodiversity conservation addressing, only helping in addressing climate change, but rather looking at it as a system. So true. And actually, the point that you just mentioned of, you know, that is the biggest paradox, or rather the major issue in climate change is the perpetrators are sitting in some part of the globe, and the victims are, you know, completely unaware in a different corner. And the major part that is coming across is the vulnerable section, especially, you know, not just the victims, but they are vulnerable in many senses. And how does, you know, because through your work, you've been working with these people, you've been working with the farmers, been working with the women, and how do you see them, you know, as climate crisis affecting these people? Because many a times they're seen as vulnerable, but can they be part of the solution as well?
Yeah. You know, I think one of the key issues on systems thinking, especially living systems thinking, is to recognize that every living system, whether it be the earth as a whole, or her ecosystems, or people in particular ecosystems, they of course face the impact of irresponsible action and harm, but they also have agency. And therefore, I've never seen vulnerable people only in the context of victimhood. You know, my work on ecofeminism is a combination of course, recognizing the violence done against women, the huge, you know, femicide that's taking place, along with the ecocide and destruction of the earth. But I also see them as leaders of change. And among the first and foremost, I think when you look at the map of India, there's no part that's not vulnerable. I come from the Himalaya. The glaciers are melting. We had the 2013 disaster, glacial melt and flooding and maldevelopment. I've called this maldevelopment in my book, saying, like, I don't call it development. I call it maldevelopment, both because it comes from a patriarchal mindset. And it is maldevelopment in the sense it is not leaving ecosystems in a healthy place or the communities in a healthy place. They are constantly getting degraded. Last year, we had the Rishiganga disaster. Now, this is doubly tragic for me personally, because the village where below Raini is where the Rishiganga dam was being built. And Raini is the village where the Chipko movement started, which is my inspiration of life. I kind of apprenticed in the Chipko movement in the 70s. And that village is disappearing because this disaster then has made that mountain slip. People don't understand the power of the earth. You know, I've watched the tsunami just take every bridge and just turn it into rubbish. You know, you only have to see the power of water, see after every cyclone. So here the Himalayas facing glacial melt because of the pollution of the rich, You got the sea level rise, the largest coastline inhabited with the largest population is the South Asian subcontinent. We are seeing erosion, we're seeing sea level rise. And if you look at the predictions, such vulnerability will take place. So here, the mountain people are having to move down, the coastal people are having to move up. You've got the central India where the monsoons are going to fail. There's something like 17% increase in instability of the monsoon. Now, monsoon is our hydrological lifeline, and its rupture, especially for central India, which is the semi-arid tract, is going to be huge. And then you have, because the oceans are increasing, you've got more and more cyclones. Our first work on climate change was, with the super cyclone in Orissa in 1999. According to the people, 30,000 people died. According to the government, it's a little less. But Orissa did an amazing job since then to reduce vulnerability. They can't stop the destruction, but they can increase the preparation, and they did. And what we had done, because I saved seeds, we had saved every seed. Among the seeds we had saved were salt-tolerant seeds. And we distributed them. After the tsunami, we distributed 2 truckloads of salt-tolerant seeds. And that's why I smile and laugh when Gates Foundation people get up and say, we've invented this. And I ask them, where did you get it from? And they go quiet and they say, oh, we respect women so much. I said, that's not the issue. The issue is your biopiracy. So 3 things are important for resilience. Yeah, vulnerability requires resilience. First, biodiversity. Nothing like biodiversity for resilience. Biodiversity in the soil increases your ability to deal with drought and deal with flooding in a huge way. We've done lots of research on this. Biodiversity of food systems. We can have a bad year. And if I had the time, I would have done a study this year. There's been about 15 to 20% drop in the wheat of Punjab. But the wheat of Punjab is a green revolution wheat. The Indian wheats are resilient wheats. And I'm sure it hasn't seen that same kind of drops, the desi seeds. So whether we have a drought or whether you have a flood, you manage to survive. And this engineering attitude, you see, you need an ecological attitude for us understanding resilience. The engineering attitude takes something very broad in resilience and narrows it down to this arrogance of control. Yeah, I will control the climate and do geoengineering. I'll control the seed and do genetic engineering. And this then narrows the niche. And that is applicable to not just ecosystems and biodiversity, it's applicable to human systems. I have seen over my lifetime, people bounce back after a flood. People bounce back after a drought. They leave their villages and then they come right back. But to have the bouncing back, you need multiple pathways. So anything that takes away the diversity of options of the vulnerable communities makes them more vulnerable. Anything that enhances the pluralism of their options creates resilience. So eventually, now onwards, the debate will have to be vulnerability and resilience.
Very true, very true. This also, brings in picture this theory of pathways being studied at IDS and discussed that the more that there are certain pathways that are, followed and certain pathways that are closed, which what you were just talking about, having multiple options, multiple pathways available to people improves their resilience. And a lot of it through our policy or through our selection or through the corporate interventions, certain pathways are completely blocked, and you can't take up those options, or they are not available, or they are not known. So I think we are coming to the next question from that the kind of pathways that Navdanya and other movements or other initiatives are creating. One of it you just mentioned, the kind of salt resilient seeds that were distributed in Odisha and help people to bounce back. What would you just help us, enlighten us about what are the other things that Navdanya or other movements are doing to help people face and address climate crisis?
There are multiple ways in which the climate impact is aggravated when you have uniform systems, when you have what I call monocultures. And with the perfect irrigation in an experimental lab and the right amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, a crop might do fine, but a slight change in heat, as we've seen with the Punjab this year, or just too much water. I have watched again and again and again when I go to the villages, the farmers with whom we work, who are using their own seeds, because that's our main work. Navdanya's main work is regenerating the biodiversity of our living seeds. And farmers, you can't save those seeds chemically. You've got to save them through organic practices, ecological practices. And the two together increase resilience. And I have watched, you can have a flood, you can have a drought, and I can identify our members' fields because they're green, while the others have totally been devastated. But the same applies also for disease and pests, because monocultures are very vulnerable to disease and pests. And we know this about climate havoc, that there will be new niches created for diseases and pests. And therefore, you have to have even more biodiversity of crops. You've got to have more biodiversity of traits in crops. And, we do an annual course on Return to Earth, in which we cover everything. And I will see if I can find the course and put it in the chat box. If there is a chat box. Our Return to Earth course goes into a lot of this. The most important thing we've learned is, the colonizing idea of knowledge made it look like everything of the past was ignorance. And as far as our work now is concerned, it's the remembering of, what are the kinds of crops that do better. It's the indigenous knowledge, that has to be reclaimed, because it was based on increasing diversity and increasing pathways and reducing risks, because our people have always survived on the edge. And on the edge, you have to maximize your pathways. I'm going to see if I can find the course and put it on the chat box.
That will be helpful, yes, because people would be interested in seeing, the courses that you are offering. I think that's the real life saving skill that we will have to all develop in the coming years. So moving on, your one answer is leading us to the next question that we anyways have is, the kind of traditional knowledge that you're saying that was kind of branded as ignorance. Whereas if we look at it from ecological point of view, it was infused in our life systems. And given that we are looking at, the whole point of looking at climate action from a systems point of view is, basically to understand how different systems will help us address, climate crisis or climate change. So how is the traditional knowledge, how can the traditional knowledge help us navigate our way through this chaos, through this catastrophe that is kind of impending? We never know when it will fall on us.
Because we have labeled things in such a colonizing way, the minute you say traditional, it sounds backward. The minute you say modern, you think you're doing well. But every modern variety is a total climate disaster. Not only is it a climate disaster in vulnerability terms, if you add industrial breeding, industrial production with chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides, you add long distance transport with globalization, including the not just the food miles, but the packaging, the processing, all of that. If I just give you the breakdown, 14% emissions come from the production system, use of fossil fuels and chemicals based on fossil fuels. Most people don't realize chemicals in agriculture are based on fossil fuels. The second component, this commodity-based system doesn't know when to stop. So it has to invade into the forests of Amazon to grow soybean for animal feed. It has to invade into the Indonesian forests. And now Indonesia is saying we won't export palm oil. That's 20% emissions. Then you have adding together the food miles, the packaging, the processing, that's another 20%. And then because you're privileging uniformity, you create waste from the farm level, as well as the waste because of long distance, as well as the waste that the price of food is not talking about the cost of food. And you made food artificially cheap for the rich people, and it's more and more expensive for the poor people. We are living through the fact that about 130 million additional hungry people, only because of one war in one part of the world. So, and for me, climate havoc is a permanent war against the earth, and in a way, people are living through it. So we're talking about 50%. When I did soil, not oil, I'd assessed from IPCC data by putting together all the elements of what contributes to an industrial food system. I talked about 45%, but it is 50%. Now, most of the time, people leave out the transport, people leave out the processing, people leave out the conversion of forests to agribusiness, and they only take production and 14%. And that's why it's very misleading. Because you have to take a system. Just like we're talking about a systems approach to climate change, we have to take a systems approach to contributing factors to climate change. And therefore, I would much rather talk about systems than tradition and modern, because they are absolutely meaningless terms. They mean nothing. Everyone has their heads full of biases. What is indigenous knowledge? What is traditional knowledge? People had to live on their own systems. Therefore, people had to have multifunctionality. That's multiple pathways. People had to have what I call the biodiversity of the mind, in contrast to the monoculture of the mind. And people participated. I've done a lot of work. My new book, Greed to Care, is about the issue of epistemology, about knowing. And all indigenous cultures knew with the earth as a partner. They co-evolved. I remember when I started saving seeds, and I was saving seeds in the Western Ghats, and this man had the most beautiful diversity, but he had very beautiful companionship. And I said, how do you work out what works with what? And he said, the plants tell me who's a Sahayak to whom. I've heard the same kind of response from Philippines peasants, that there is this deeper systems knowledge of communication, knowing that you are dealing with living systems, that then allows you to create new pathways. And that's why one of the systems we teach in our seed saving is something evolved by the top plant breeder of the world, Dr. Ceccarelli. Dr. Ceccarelli evolved what he calls evolutionary breeding. We are in climate chaos times. You cannot freeze 5 seeds in Svalbard seed bank. You've got to let the seeds evolve to be able to deal with the new temperature, the new water, the new rain, the new hail. And that evolutionary intelligence that is in the plant was denied in industrial breeding, and that will have to come back. And all indigenous knowledge systems never denied the life of the planet or the intelligence of plants.
Yes, thank you so much for correcting us there. And I think
Can I just say one more thing? Just
yes,
one
please.
more little thing.
Yes, please.
So, I'm thinking more and more about what are the systems that heal the cycles, because at the end of it, it's about how much do you heal the cycle. And I can't believe it that every tree, our villages were packed with a neem and a peepal and a bargat. these are the trees, these trees that were planted everywhere. All our meetings took place under the peepal tree. The neem was everywhere. They are the most efficient producers of oxygen, which means they're the most efficient converters of carbon dioxide to it. So our sacred trees were really life support systems of the highest order. And there must have been knowledge there that allowed the identification of these species. And we will have to turn, because there's no science that can catch up and speed up to know all the plants, all the trees. They can do genome maps, but a genome map doesn't tell you anything. You have to know the original data of the plant. They make genomic maps and take a patent, but the patent is on the basis of the passport data from the seed bank. So a genome doesn't tell you anything. The plant as a whole and its knowledge is what tells you a lot. And there's a lot of, how would I call it? Just yesterday, the news came out, or was it today, of the person in England who recommended the shutdown and the lockdown, Ferguson, and he's now in deep trouble and he's having to resign. So this idea that somehow if you work with data, you're Mr. Know-all, and that village woman who takes care of every plant and knows the difference between an oxygen under a neem tree and the oxygen under a eucalyptus tree, we cannot discount that knowledge anymore. We don't have the luxury to ignore indigenous traditional knowledge.
True. And I think we also have to develop ways of understanding, observing, and learning differently, rather than sitting in just classrooms reading textbooks. There are different ways of acquiring this knowledge, which we need to start, exploring.
Absolutely. And interestingly, Pradnya, there is already a massive flux. The very people who made us locked into classrooms who read books are saying now, forget the classroom and forget the books. And so in any way, it's a moment of flux. And this is exactly the time to find new ways of learning, new ways of living on this earth. Because learning should never have been separated. To me, I did my quantum theory, but over time I realized, my God, those agricultural experts have no idea about any seed, any soil, nothing. They have a degree. And the women know everything in the field. And I said, what is this kind of expertise that has the ignorant person with a degree decide what to do and the knowledgeable person without a degree? And it is Chipko who taught me how much knowledge there is among the people. And we have to give up arrogance of degrees and live the humility of plurality of knowledges.
So true. I mean, what you just said reminded me of one of the workshops that we attended with Robert Chambers, where he makes, he makes the participants look at the uppers and the lowers, what he calls them. What you just said, the expert who has this know-it-all approach and the badge, and this, actual practitioner who actually does stuff, maybe doesn't have that badge. And then how the hierarchy today is treating both of them.
Yeah.
So true. And from that, moving on to a very technical question, but we are today under the climate change topic, talking about India going net zero by 2070. That's our commitment. And that's how the National Action Plan on Climate Change is also talking about, and developing ways of reaching that. How do you think we are actually eventually reaching out to net zero by 2070?
The first time I read about net zero was in this book. We earlier talked about those with degrees, prescribing to those with the knowledge. now you have people without degrees, but lots of money, prescribing to the world what to do. So net zero, in Mr. Gates's book, says net zero is not reducing pollution. It's just finding places for offset. Now that is what the Glasgow discussion ended up. And all of last year in the lead up to Glasgow, I debated so many of these people, particularly the guy who's been appointed to the UNFCCC financial system. He used to be the chief of the Bank of England. I can't remember his name, but he too said that. He said, we've got the finance all right, but now we've got to look for land for offsets. Now, anything that begins with that assumption begins with colonialism as an assumption. So, we know net zero is about not getting rid of pollution. It's about a new colonization, and it's the people who are writing about it who are saying it. But the second big issue in this, and this I'm speaking as a scientist, as a system scientist, is there's too much of trivialization of language and meaning on an issue like climate havoc and climate catastrophe, which is a life and death issue. You cannot play games with words. Words must mean what you want them to mean and what the reality is. Now, in all of these years of my studies, I have realized that you cannot talk carbon alone. You've got to talk dead carbon, which is the fossilized carbon that the earth rotted over 660 million years. And she didn't expect us to use it. Yeah. So her work of 660 million years turned into coal, turned into gas, turned into oil. Just over the last 100 years, we started to drill oil. In the last few decades, we started to frack gas.
Vandana ji, you've gone on mute. Sorry to disturb you. Can't hear you. You've gone on mute. Yeah.
Didn't do anything. This is fascinating. Well, this is our systems don't want me to talk about this, but
not at all.
So there's dead carbon. This is what I was saying earlier. It doesn't fit into the metabolism of the earth. And yet we are pushing it on everything. We're pushing it into the way we grow food. We're pushing it, I look at a bottle of plastic water and I say, oh my God, we're drinking oil. Oil was used to pump the water, 1.5 million liters every plant. Oil was used to make the plastic. Oil is used in everything. We are living, eating, breathing oil. And this is such a short, recent issue. But then to take this dead carbon and then do two things, which are a mistake. The first is to behave as if there is no living carbon. And my work on biodiversity is about the fact that all life is carbon. Yeah. What is a plant? Or what is life? Life is taking the sunlight, photosynthesis, through a process of transformation, create carbohydrates, living carbon, the molecule of life, and oxygen. Two molecules, magical molecules. This decarbonization language is shutting your mind even worse on the processes of life. And by saying decarbonize, you are in fact definitely not making the polluter pay, which was the beginnings of the UNFCCC, the polluter must pay, but you're doing worse. What you're basically doing is by treating all carbons, living and dead, as equal, you are then finding new ways to put a new burden on the vulnerable people. Now, I see on a daily basis the new financial architecture being put in place, where this equivalence will mean ordinary people will not be able to live in a forest. The tribals will be driven out. Small farmers will be driven off their land. And that's why we must be scientifically accurate. and distinguish between dead carbon and living carbon. And instead of net zero, I would say we have to be net positive on living carbon. Otherwise, we won't be able to heal the earth. If we don't green the earth and do more photosynthesis and do more biodiversity regeneration, we will not be able to repair. We will not be able to adapt. So we've got to put living carbon center stage. And living carbon means we've got to basically go zero, absolute zero on fossil carbon, and increase and make positive. And this is my next piece of work. I'm going to start working, just like I said, yield per acre doesn't measure anything meaningful. It merely measures the commodity you produce by polluting the earth, destroying the climate, polluting the water, destroying people's bodies and health. So we evolved health per acre and nutrition per acre. We're going to evolve the true calculus of what our relationship with the earth, mediated by the rest of biodiversity, what kind of calculus does it need for countries to meet their objectives while respecting the rights of their most vulnerable communities. This is a piece of work needing to be done. I welcome any of you who wants to join up in this as an intern. It's very important. It has to be done. Remember, living carbon must be increased. Dead carbon must be stopped. Otherwise, not only will we not solve the climate catastrophe, we will create new hunger catastrophes. We will create new disease catastrophes. We will create new poverty catastrophes. And the whole system will socially blow up long before it's blown up by climate hell.
Vandana ji, that was a very enticing offer to work with you. And I'm sure you'll get a lot of requests after this webinar is over. It's very interesting the way you're deconstructing the, even carbon. And unfortunately, we have developed the major trend or the major discourse around climate change has developed certain stereotypes where you tend to just develop a myopic view, the way you unravel the whole discourse around carbon. It's really enlightening. And I think with that, we have a lot of questions coming in. So with a brief, I would request a brief comment from you before I move on to the questions is, do you see a very specific, role for the youth? One is obviously you have already invited interns, but do you see any specific role for the youth to play in climate action?
Well, it's the future of the youth, and you don't just have a responsibility, you have a right. And I always say the violation of the rights of nature and the violation of the rights of future generations is the same violation, because every harm to the earth is closing the options for the youth in the future. So, definitely, for me, my joy of life has been to never stop learning. And I would suggest that's a role for the youth. Never say, this is the degree I have. Now I'm going to just do a consultancy and teach so and so and so and so and so and so. Because we're living in too vulnerable a time, And I think for your personal selves, you need to really understand the world of which you are a part and find your right place in it. The second is you definitely can play a big role in climate justice, because the climate movement grew out of climate justice. And even in Glasgow, look at the numbers of people fighting for climate justice, but they were out on the streets. And inside, were the private jets flying in and putting a line here and a line there. And I think climate justice is a very important place for you all to work. And I think the third very important part is, I've lived a full cycle of an India that had no pollution, an India that had no plastic, an India that had no chemicals, all the way to every kind of pollution, every kind of respiratory problem. We are the highest rate of diabetes, the highest rate of chronic respiratory diseases, all of them interconnected. I think for your generation, for young people, particularly in India, defining what's a good life for you. I've just done a book which will be published sometime soon. It's called Slow Living, and it was written during the COVID lockdown. What is a good life? And my friends and colleagues in Latin America, we've worked on many, rights of nature, constitutions, all. But bon vivre is a word they've created, and the young people are organizing around that. What's a good life for me? What's a good life in which I'm at peace with the earth? And I think these are systems answers, not on systems analysis of something out there, but of systems living of wholesomeness and well-being for yourself.
Thank you, Vandana. I'll now quickly move on to the questions that are waiting. There are quite a few. And here's the first one from Anvesha, who says, can small-scale community-level plantation help make a difference, or a large-scale plantation drives would make the needed impact? What action contributions do you suggest for people living in cities in the context of reviving biodiversity?
Well, first of all, plantations is the wrong word to use. We've got to regenerate forests, and we've got to regenerate trees, which is very different, because the minute you talk regeneration of biodiversity of trees, you talk about diversity of trees. Plantations mean it's the same plant. Now, it's the same eucalyptus. And plantations have been a failure. One of my earlier studies when I was in the Institute of Management was an ecological audit of eucalyptus cultivation. And we worked on the systems analysis of what does the eucalyptus do for the ecosystem and for people. And it had only one function, to go to a pulp mill. That's all. It goes to a pulp mill. And what does an indigenous species do for the soil, for the farmer, for the climate? So I think we are starting to learn much more about the need to revegetate cities. Because, just today I was reading, one tree in your neighborhood, 5 ACs. It's equal to 5 ACs. So I think we need to get out of this consumption idea that we're here to consume and put 5 ACs in my house and pump the heat for the poor people sitting on the pavements to die of the heat. That's bad enough with climate change, but made worse with my ACs. So I think regreening of cities through trees and appropriate trees. I have worked with so many cities and governments around the world. And I sometimes will say something and I come back and say, oh, the parking lots should be gardens. And they are gardens. That parking spaces should have maybe one for a car and one for a tree. These are new systems designs that you all can do. These are the challenges we can take. Why on earth should we assume for the future the ecologically blind, socially blind recipes of concretization of cities, as well as the monoculture of the mind of just one crop in the field and just one kind of tree planted? Large-scale monocultures have already proven to be false. There's a whole camper thing. You cut a real forest, which is a real source of oxygen and biodiversity, and you plant a monoculture for a pulp mill, and you treat these two as equal. They are not equal. And large-scale monocultures have to be monocultures, and they have to be for raw material. What we need is vegetation to address the crisis of the collapse of the infrastructure of life. When we talk ecological collapse, what are we talking? The infrastructure of life. So you got to regreen cities with diversity. So many cities, the people have blocked, glyphosate was sprayed all over, and city after city, and town council after town council saying, we will not spray this poison to kill plants. Another is, we've got to have more gardens in the cities. Why should, when Lal Bahadur Shastri was a prime minister, he said, why do we have lawns? Grow food. Why do we have lawns? Let's grow biodiversity of food to nourish us and nourish the earth. And I know town councils are making all kinds of new codes so that gardens on terraces, gardens on balconies, gardens in front and back lawns, community gardens are now becoming a norm. So there are hundreds of ways, but just take this from me after my 50 years of deep work in this field. A monoculture is never a solution. Diversity is always the solution, no matter what the issue. Could be peace in society. A monoculture idea of what the society should look like will create havoc. A monoculture plantation and monoculture agriculture have all created problems.
I'll move on to the next question. I'm sorry, I'm doing a marathon here because there is a lot of questions coming up. So the next question is with reference to systems thinking. Systems thinking is not easily understood by common man and can't see in holistic development. Can you please elaborate how they can be involved because they are in more numbers?
I think you're mistaken to say the common person doesn't have systems thinking. You know, they have to survive under the biggest odds. Ordinary people are not supposed to exist. You know, if you are a street dweller and you're somehow surprising, you have to have a very strong systems thinking to survive on that street. You can't have a one-dimensional linear mind. So ordinary people have systems thinking. It's the grooming of the mechanical mind and the monocultural mind that shrinks our ability to think in multidimensional ways, to think in terms of relationships, to think in terms of processes, and to think in terms of patterns. That is systems thinking. And reality teaches you that. The luxury of learning from books makes you forget it for a while, but you all are here to learn it again. So my simple lesson in life has been learn from the people, learn from nature, learn from the people.
There are a lot of echoes, Vandana ji, that I hear from you that remind me of what Robert talks about.
You know, we worked very closely with Robert Chambers. I'm not talking, he's now very old. I'm talking of, you know, in those IM days, in those, you know, I'm talking about the early 80s, so long ago. But I'm so glad he's evergreen. He's still going strong.
Yeah, your talks do resonate. I mean, as I said, it reminds us of what, because learn from the people and learn from the nature is so much what I guess great minds think alike. So let's not. The next question is, one of the entry-level barrier in promoting in ecological agriculture is that farmers feel their farm productivity and income will go down. How do you look at it? How do you respond to this?
Yeah. Now, this is something I don't just look at, and this is what I've done. So the illusion that productivity will go down is created by that measure of yield per acre. That if you decide that there'll only be one crop, and it'll only be the part of the crop that leave your farm for the market, you know, and you create a yield per acre category, and measure productivity on that way, you actually destroy the biological productivity of the farm, and you destroy the crop productivity. How do I say crop productivity? But the dwarf varieties of the Green Revolution actually wasted the straw. They treated the straw as waste. But in a plant, the straw goes to the soil and feeds us next year. And the grain is eaten by us, and some is kept as seed. If you have noticed, you know, the stubble burning, we never call straw stubble. That's a new language. And that stubble burning problem of Punjab is related to that so-called increase in productivity with dwarf varieties. How can a dwarf be more than a tall? You know, it's just wrong. I always joke and say, you know, like there was a film called Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And I said, Mr. Borlaug said, honey, I shrunk the plants. And then they say I had grew more. So one is productivity is higher. In our book, we have a report called Health per Acre and Nutrition per Acre. The more the density of biodiversity, the more the nutrition and health per acre is produced, the higher is the productivity. I have a whole book because I started to look at productivity in biodiversity terms, and I call it biodiversity-based productivity. And we measured farm after farm after farm, and we could feed 2 times India's population by conserving biodiversity and making India climate resilient. In terms of productivity in incomes, our work has shown why are farmers losing their incomes? If they're buying costly BT cotton seed or a costly cauliflower seed, hybrid cauliflower, which has to be bought every year, You have to buy your fertilizers, your pesticides. This year, the fertilizer price has jumped 60% because of the Ukraine-Russia war. The price of inputs keeps going up. And just last week, 24 farmers in Punjab have committed suicide with a combination of increasing cost of inputs and the falling performance of their vulnerable wheat. So you are in debt. Debt is not an income. Debt is a debt. So our work has shown that when we make farmers self-reliant in seed, we make them self-reliant in ecological agriculture, that the inputs come from them. The inputs come from the farm. It could be the mulch. It could be the cow urine. It could be 100 sources of biomass return and organic matter return. That the farmers are earning 10 times more. We have a book. So we have a book called Health Per Acre that counters the myth of higher productivity of industrial agriculture and shows biodiverse agriculture produces more. And then we have a book called Wealth Per Acre, where the agriculture minister wrote the foreword. And we are showing that farmers using their own seeds, using ecological systems, and finding their own markets, not being dominated through an exploitation system, which leaves 5% in their hands. The global supply chains leave 5% in the hands of the farmer and the burden of debt. So, and this is data from across different states of India. They can earn as much as 10 times higher, but definitely twice as much. I mean, all our BT, farmers who gave up BT cotton and started to use organic cotton seeds that we distributed, they're earning twice as much as the BT cotton people. So income and productivity is higher when you do biodiverse ecological agriculture. And if farmers want to come and train and learn, tell them to come to Navdanya. This is what Navdanya's Learning Center is about.
Moving on to the next question, Vandanaji. There's another question which I will skip because you've already answered that, as how contemporary urbanization is based on landscape alteration and what we can do, what biodiversity conservation, how it can be done in rapidly urbanizing India. The next question is, can you elaborate the steps to be taken by financial institution to recognize climate-related financial risks and how to manage it? What role or guidance should be given by the regulator?
Well, the insurance companies have already understood the risks. But like I said, there is another financial system that is trying to mutate itself into turning the risks to the people into their gain. And that to me is a deepening of climate injustice. Yeah. So that's why I say countries must evolve their own climate science and their own risk assessment. Because if the countries fail to do it, just like in another age, no, it's not another age, World Bank and IMF are still there. And look at Sri Lanka having to go to IMF to borrow again. I don't know, they borrow 13 times to just run their affairs. But every time they borrow, they have an interest payment and a debt. So every time your ability to run your affairs becomes more difficult. And we have to do sovereign climate policy, climate science, and risk assessment. And I would add, this has to be participatory. I think it can only happen, the bureaucrats sitting in Delhi don't understand anything. When I've done the studies on the post-disaster impact, whether it's after cyclones, Amphan and all of that, or the Uttarakhand disasters, it's the people who really know what the risks are. So this whole idea of participatory planning has to become a deeper aspect in this period of climate vulnerability. The panchayat systems should get involved.
The decentralization is another, agenda that actually goes closely with, moving more towards the local and addressing the biodiversity in the local area. Because you cannot have one uniform code for biodiversity. That's the paradox. So the next question we're coming to is, one argument for genetically modified food is that it's scientific and safe. Kindly throw light on it. Also kindly let us know if we really need genetically modified food in India?
Yeah. Okay. So if I shoot a gene into a plant, there's a science that's gone into the shooting of the gene. Actually, there's not much science, the technology, you shoot a gene. That's what they call it, the gene gun. There's another science, which is what does that do to the plant and the plant's existence in the ecosystem. So the number one science is what the biotech industry, which is the chemical industry, which is the Monsantos of the world, promote. The science of impact is the science in which I participated. I worked with the United Nations to frame the biodiversity biosafety protocol. So biosafety is a science of assessment. Just like you have risk assessment in climate havoc, you have risk assessment in genetic modification. In terms of safe, the problem is, again, with such a long history now, every scientist who did the work to show the harm, Arpad Putsai, who showed the intestines of the rats were absolutely inflamed with 3 months of rat feeding. Seralini, who showed that there's vital organ failure and there's tumors. The WHO recognized that this is glyphosate and glyphosate tolerant GMOs are probable carcinogens. I showed the impact on ecosystems and biodiversity and on farmers. Now, any of us who worked on biosafety, which is the science of impact, were hounded. And because there's huge profits to be made. So Arpad Putsai actually had to go back. He left England. He went back to Hungary. He died. He had a stroke because he was such a good scientist. He never even imagined there's a mafia at work. He didn't know there's a mafia of the chemical industry at work. Well, I know this mafia because I started working on them since 1984 when the Bhopal disaster happened. And I always say, if I hadn't left a university job in 1982 to start the research foundation, they'd have made sure my job went. They'd have gone to the director and made sure. Yeah. So fortunately, there's no job I have which they could destroy. And they can definitely, no matter how well they work at claiming, they have to destroy my degrees to say I'm not a scientist. They have to remove my MSc honors in particle physics. And I say, you have to be so scared and so threatened. What kind of scientists are you that you have to deny another scientist's background? So the safe issue and the scientific issue, both are debatable issues. It's just that one side has power and money and the other side gets crushed. Silencing of society is not truth. Censorship is not science.
Every response is giving us a very, very different perspective to look at climate change afresh. And I come here with the last question because we are running out of time now. So the last question is coming. Can we make biodiversity conservation from families and society with social and spiritual value towards it, then top-down approach, which has been a failure many times?
I definitely believe that biodiversity regeneration can be an amazing power to not just create climate resilience, but can be an amazing power to heal society. Because when you work together, through biodiversity, you also understand the value of cultural diversity. You start to recognize that, our national anthem is so beautiful. I wish we sang all 5 stanzas, because after the first 2, there's a beautiful one that Tagore wrote, which doesn't get sung enough. And he said, people came from all over the world. We planted gardens of diversity and we made garlands of love with that diversity. That is where the social, cultural, spiritual values associated with life and biodiversity, and the very basic idea of we are one earth family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Let's give ecological content to that word and not leave it as an empty slogan. Vasudhaiva, Vasundhara, the earth, Kutumba, her family. We are family with the trees and the rivers, We are family with the birds and the earthworms. What a rich ecological civilization. And you as young people have such a legacy to first understand, regenerate, and prevent its polarization. I was just reading a poem. ये क्या हो गया भारतवर्ष को कि खजूर मुसलमान और नारियल हिंदू हो गया. Yeah, everyone eats coconut, everyone eats khajur. So let's not allow the fragmentation of our beautiful civilization. And I leave you with the very best wishes. And as I said, if any of you want to take this further, wherever you are, you know, Pragna has my email, and let's do this work. And, you know, people always say, how can you work from the margins? Well, the margins are the only place where creativity happens.
So true. And there's just one small observation, you know, that with every response, it's like you are diversity personified, because with every unfortunately, we have grown with a view to, you know, uniformalize, standardize everything, cutting out all the outliers and making life more and more monocultural. And thank you for bringing in so much of diversity, and especially when, as Indians, we grew up with this slogan of unity and diversity, and that's the strength of India. And I think we need to wake up to this call of diversity.
Absolutely.
Right now, well, I would, yes, Vandana ji, I would quickly invite Kalyan to express our vote of thanks, because he's the system thinking mind behind this whole initiative of systems thinking for climate action, and has been passionately following up systems thinking, working with the tribals, trying to understand their, you know, their mental frame and where the system thinking lies. So I would quickly like him to you know, express our word of thanks.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Vandana ji, you have always been our inspiration, an inspiration for many like us. So I cannot really thank you enough for being the inspiration. And you re-inspired us today. I mean, there were times, you know, when we had started working on systems thinking, in the beginning, we wanted to translate it to the level where even tribal communities, rural communities can use this approach in planning their interventions, learning from them. Even some of our mentors would ask, what are you trying to sell and to whom? And we would say, you know, we are not trying to sell anything. A paradigm shift is required. And we are trying to bring in that paradigm shift. And so today, you know, your talk reassured us that we are heading in the right direction. And this is a cause worth spending the life. And so we would try to do our best. So thank you so much again for re-inspiring us, I would say. And also for, you know, accepting the invitation on a very short notice. And it was kind of an informal invitation to begin with, but you accepted it. We are really grateful for you, for giving your time and all the inputs. I also want to thank the Chimney Awards in India and Supriya for sparing her time and continuing to give us the support. Thank you, Pradyumna. And want to thank everyone who participated in this discussion, and even others who were not able to join us today, but would you know, definitely watch this video on YouTube and other social media platforms. And unfortunately, in the interest of time, we couldn't take all the questions, but we'll try and, you know, we'll share some of these questions with Vandana ji, and we'll try and get, you know, her response on those questions, and would definitely like to share it with you. Vandana ji, it would be great to work with you. Thank you so much for the offer to join your team. We're looking forward to continuing this discussion. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.